Yo, what's up everyone? It's the Potter Show, and today we're checking out Gringotts' blood ritual found Harry was heir to 11 ancient houses and every Dark Lord bowed before him. Drop a like if you're hyped, subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Weight of Gold. The owl arrived on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate. Tuesdays had always struck Harry as the week's most bureaucratic day. Wednesday had the dignity of a midpoint, Monday the drama of a beginning, but Tuesday existed purely to process things. Parchment smelled of ministry ink and carried the seal of the Department of Magical Inheritances. A sub-office so obscure Harry had not known it existed until 4 months ago when it had sent the first letter, which he had ignored, and then a second, which he had also ignored, and then a third that arrived via ministry enforcer who stood in the doorway of number 12, Grimmauld Place at 7 in the morning, with the specific expression of a man who had been warned. He read it standing at the kitchen counter in his socks. Outside, London was doing what September London did: gray sky, rain that couldn't commit to being rain, the smell of wet stone coming through the cracked window above the sink that Creature had been meaning to fix since June. The Wisengamot Inheritance Reconciliation Act of 1998 required all eligible witches and wizards with contested, disputed, or unverified estate claims to present themselves at Gringotts Wizarding Bank for a formal inheritance audit within 6 months of the Act's passage. The ministry had been working through the list in alphabetical order. They had reached P 3 weeks ago. Harry set the parchment on the counter beside his tea. He looked at it for a moment. Right, he said to no one, because Creature was in the cellar and the house was otherwise empty, and the word needed to go somewhere. He was dressed and on the steps of Gringotts before 9. The bank's marble entrance hall was busy, the post-war economy in full, anxious reconstruction. Gold moving through the building at a pace that suggested the wizarding world was collectively stress-spending its way toward normalcy. Harry nodded to the door goblin, surrendered his wand for the standard security scan, watched it come back clean, and stood for a moment in the middle of the entrance hall traffic and oriented himself. He did not expect to see Hermione. She was standing 20 feet ahead, wearing research robes and carrying a bag that bulged with books in a way that was not incidental. She had not just brought books because she happened to be here. She had brought books for here, which meant she had known about the audit in advance, which meant she had been monitoring his ministry correspondence again, which she had promised in July she would stop doing after the incident with the Portkey registration forms. "Don't," Harry said when he reached her and she opened her mouth. "I haven't said anything." "You have a citation ready, I can tell by the bag." Hermione pressed her lips together in a way that was not quite an admission but was adjacent to one. "The Act has several provisions that are, I thought it would be useful to have someone here who had read it." "Have you read it?" "Twice," she said, "once for content and once for structure." "Right." Harry retrieved his wand from the security counter. "Thanks." She fell into step beside him and did not say "I told you so," which was its own form of communication. The goblin waiting at the far end of the hall was not a standard teller. Harry registered this with the attentive economy he had developed over 7 years of noticing things that were slightly off, filed behind his eyes as a fact, available if needed, not yet alarming. The goblin stood a full hand taller than any teller Harry had dealt with before, dressed in robes of absolute black with a single stripe of copper at each cuff. He was not standing at a counter, he was standing in front of a door that Harry had walked past dozens of times without its ever being there. "Mr. Potter," the voice was deep for the size of him, resonant and precisely articulated, each consonant placed with deliberate weight. "I am Ragnarok, Senior Administrator, Estates and Inheritance. The chamber is prepared." "Is it usual?" Hermione said carefully, because she had prepared, and preparing meant asking the questions other people overlooked, for a senior administrator to conduct a standard inheritance audit personally. Ragnarok's eyes moved to her. They had the unhurried quality of something very old performing a very thorough assessment of something relatively new. "It is usual," he said, "when the estate in question warrants particular institutional attention. And this one does," Harry said. Ragnarok's chin tilted, not a nod, but something that acknowledged the question had merit while finding the entrance hall an unsuitable venue for its answer. "The chamber is prepared, Mr. Potter." The door opened. The corridor beyond was nothing like the standard cart tunnels, which plunged and rattled and smelled of iron and cold speed. This was a walking corridor, low-ceilinged, lit by copper lanterns whose flames burned the specific amber of very old enchantment rather than ordinary fire. The three of them walked in a silence that was not uncomfortable but was deliberately maintained by all parties. Ragnarok setting the pace at the front, their footsteps the only sound, the stone underfoot worn to a smoothness that spoke of centuries of the same passage. The air changed as they went deeper, not colder, different. Mineral, faintly charged, the precise quality of the moment before a storm that hadn't started yet. Harry breathed it in without comment. "The Inheritance Reconciliation Act," Hermione said to Ragnar's back, in the tone she deployed when she was interrogating a situation while appearing to merely think aloud, "applies specifically to contested and unverified estate claims." Harry's vault contents are already verified. The Potter estate was settled in full when he came of age. "The contents of Vault 687, yes," Ragnar said. He did not slow down. "We are not here about the contents of Vault 687. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at the corridor ahead. The room at the corridor's end was not a vault in any sense he associated with the word circular. Roughly 15 feet across. Stone walls so old that the natural grain in them had polished itself to smoothness under some process of long time that left the surface looking less carved than remembered, as if the stone had decided, over centuries, to become this shape. At the center, carved directly from the floor, a shallow basin 2 feet across filled with water that was too still to be natural. Above it, a copper bracket held a single white candle, upright and burning without any visible source of ignition. There was no other furniture, no other light, no visible door once Ragnar stepped through, and it sealed itself behind them without drama or sound. "Blood inheritance rituals," Hermione said, and her voice had gone steady in the specific way it went steady when she was controlling something, "were classified as restricted magical practice under the 1752 statute of." "The 1752 statute applies to performed rituals," Ragnar said pleasantly. His hands were clasped behind him and he was looking at the basin. "This is a reading. The distinction is noted in subsection 4 of the Reconciliation Act your ministry passed in June." He produced a quill from inside his robe, black-shafted, its tip a gleaming copper point that glowed with the warmth of old enchantment, and set it on the basin's rim. "1 drop, Mr. Potter." Index finger, left hand, the water conducts the lineage assessment. Harry looked at the quill, not the instrument of Umbridge's detention, nothing like it. The point was blunt, not sharp, and the glow at its tip was warm rather than dark, old rather than malicious. He picked it up, pressed the copper point to the pad of his finger, felt a pinprick of pressure, and held his hand over the water. The single drop that fell was too dark for blood, almost black in the candle's light. It hit the surface and spread in a perfect circle, not disrupting the stillness of the water but adding to it, the way a word added to a sentence rather than interrupting it. Then it split, 3 lines radiating outward, then 5, then more than he could count without moving his head, each line branching and rebranching in patterns that looked organic, frost on glass, the underside of a leaf, the map of a river delta viewed from very far above. Ragnar was not watching the basin, he was watching Harry. The water began to glow, not the blue of standard revealing enchantments, not the silver of detection charms. A deep red gold that rose from below the surface rather than above it, as if the water had a source of light it had been keeping in reserve. From the branching lines, letter shapes formed, then words, then names. Potter, expected. His father's name, his mother's name behind it, the whole narrow column of his immediate family rendered in waterlight and perfectly legible. Black. Also expected. Sirius's bequest had been made explicit in the will, painful in its brevity, legal in its clarity. Peveril. Harry's attention narrowed to a point, not a physical response, nothing so legible as that. What happened was internal and precise. The world contracted to the size of the name in the water, and everything outside that size went slightly distant, the way peripheral sound fades when you hear your own name called in a crowd. He read the third name again, Peveril. The cloak folded in his trunk at Grimmauld Place arrived in his memory with sudden, vivid weight, not as cloth, not as magic, but as inheritance. As something that had been waiting for him to understand what it was. Gryffindor. Hermione made a sound, not a word. The noise a person makes when information arrives that is too large for the immediate processing capacity of a prepared mind. Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff. 3 more names followed in the branching light, the water script flowing with the same unhurried clarity as the first 4. Pendragon, Gaunt, Flamel. And then the 11th forming last, as if the water had left it for its own reasons. Imrise. The water went absolutely still. The red gold light did not fade dramatically, it simply ended. The basin returned to ordinary water in ordinary candlelight, and the chamber was once again just stone and flame and 3 people, and a silence that had quality and weight and a particular density that comes from very large facts settling into a space that had not previously contained them. 11, Ragnar said. It was not a question. 11, Harry said. His own voice came back to him level and even, which was correct. He had not planned for it to come back any particular way, but level was correct. Hermione was already writing. She had produced a quill and parchment from somewhere on her person with the practiced speed of someone who came to every situation having already decided she might need to transcribe it. Her hand moved at lecture pace, faster than reading pace, trying to capture the names before the immediacy of their appearance faded. She wrote Gaunt and her quill slowed. She wrote it again, deliberating over each letter. The Gaunt name, she said, to Ragnarok, her voice controlled with a precision that meant she was working hard on the controlling passes through Salazar Slytherin's direct line. By maternal entailment through Cadmus Peveril, which means the Slytherin seat and the Peveril seat aren't separate claims. They're nested, Ragnarok said. He had moved to a section of the wall that Harry had not noted as containing anything in particular, which now contained a copper filing cabinet. He drew it open and began extracting parchment rolls, not rifling through, not searching, but pulling specific documents with the certainty of a man who has known for some time exactly which ones would be needed today. He set them in a row on the floor between Harry and the basin, 11 rolls of parchment laid out with the precision of a legal argument. Each house holds a founding seat in the Wisengamot. 7 are currently occupied by provisional lords, appointed under the contested inheritance provision in the absence of a verified primary heir. The Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Peveril seats have been held in institutional abeyance for varying periods, the longest being the Peveril seat, which has been in abeyance for 312 years. He straightened. The full documentation is before you. Harry was looking at 11 rolls of parchment on a stone floor. He was thinking about 7 proxy lords voting under his names in his seats without his knowledge for whatever period of time each arrangement had been in force. You knew, he said, not an accusation, a recognition, the specific quality of acknowledgement that identifies a fact which has been true for longer than the present conversation. Ragnarok placed his hands together, fingertip to fingertip. Gringotts' blood lineage records predate the Wisengamot by 2 centuries. The convergence of these particular 11 lines in a single living heir was theoretically anticipated based on genealogical projection for some decades. Whether a living heir would present for confirmation was a question the records could not answer. He held Harry's gaze. We are glad you did. Why? Hermione said. Her quill was still. Ragnarok's expression did something small and controlled. Because 3 formal letters of inquiry regarding Mr. Potter's inheritance status were received at this institution before Mr. Potter's audit was scheduled. The copper lantern in the corridor beyond the sealed door was audible now, a low, resonant hum Harry had been hearing since they entered without registering as a distinct sound. He registered it now because his attention had no more urgent claim on it. From whom? He said. Ragnarok produced a final parchment from inside his robe. He set it on the floor beside the 11 house rolls with the same deliberate precision he had given each of them. Harry picked it up, 3 names evenly spaced on the page, the institutional Gringotts letterhead above them making them look like entries in a record of fact rather than a list of people. Roll, Selwyn. Aldrich Knott, Lord of the Knott family seat, convener, traditional houses committee. Theodore's grandfather, Harry said. Correct, Ragnarok said. He survived both wars, Hermione said, her voice flat and informational, by being useful to both sides. He was brought up on charges twice, insufficient evidence on both occasions, the witnesses being unable to testify. She paused. I did background research before we came. The pause told Harry she had done significantly more than background research. He authored the original draft of the Purity Codification Act in 1994. The version Fudge refused to table because even Fudge considered it excessive. What was in it? Harry said. Hermione looked at her notes and seemed to weigh the economy of the answer. Muggle-born witches and wizards redefined as non-citizen magical residents. Wand ownership conditional on proof of 3 generations of magical ancestry. Educational attendance at Hogwarts and equivalent institutions restricted accordingly. She looked up. It didn't pass. Knott has rewritten it 4 times. The current version is in a Wisengamot subcommittee. To pass, it needs a supermajority. She did not say the next part. She was looking at Ragnarok with the expression she deployed when she wanted someone else to confirm a number she had already calculated. A supermajority binding vote, Ragnarok said, under the original Hogwarts charter requires 9 founding seats in agreement. 9 out of 11. The number occupied the chamber with the physical presence of a large piece of furniture placed in a small room. Harry looked at it metaphorically, the way you look at something you need to understand before you decide what to do about it. He stood up. He had been crouching over the basin without quite deciding to. The room had a quality that encouraged proximity to the ground, or possibly he had just been close to the light. He stood and was the tallest thing in the chamber, and the candle above the basin was still burning with its small, steady, sourceless flame. "They want to use my seats," he said. "They want you to sign," Ragnok said, with the same careful precision he applied to every syllable, "a legislative compact that would bind the voting rights of all 11 founding seats to a coordinated block vote directed by the Traditional Houses Committee. The mechanism is ancient, a blood compact from the Founders' era, designed originally to allow allied houses to coordinate their votes in defense of shared interests. In its current proposed application, all 11 of Harry's seats vote however Knott's committee instructs them to," Hermione said. She had abandoned the controlled pace. Her voice had gone quick and flat, stripped of its usual discursive architecture, permanently. "Under the compact's terms, and they would have the 9-seat supermajority. Immediately, the Purity Codification Act passes in the first sitting after the compact is signed." "The compact is entirely legal," Ragnok said. "Its language has never been applied in this context, but the provisions support the application." "What's the counter?" Harry said. Ragnok reached into his robe and produced a final document. This one was not rolled. It was folded into a square, its edges sealed with copper wax, the parchment itself a different quality from everything else on the floor, not fragile, not decayed, but old in the manner of a thing that has been deliberately maintained, that has been handled with the specific care reserved for objects whose value is understood across generations. He set it on the stone floor beside the house rolls. "The same compact contains a dissolution clause," he said. 11 founding seats acting in unanimous concert may invoke the original Hogwarts Charter to dissolve a legislative body operating in violation of its founding compact. Full re-election required within 60 days. The clause has never been invoked. He placed his hands together. "The decision on which mechanism to employ, the cooperation compact or the dissolution clause, must be made within 28 days of today's audit completion." Harry picked up the folded parchment. The copper wax was warm under his thumbs, not dramatically warm, not magically warm in any way that demanded acknowledgement, but warm the way a coal stays warm hours after the fire has gone, storing what it was given. He turned it over. "You knew about the dissolution clause when the letters from Knott's faction arrived," Harry said. He was not looking at Ragnok, he was looking at the wax seal. "You could have simply reported the inheritance findings to the ministry and waited." "Let the process proceed." The copper lanterns hummed. "Gringotts has operated under the terms of the 1717 Treaty of Vault Integrity for 281 years, Ragnok said. "The treaty guarantees our institutional neutrality in matters of human political governance. We do not interfere in such matters." A pause that had texture. "We do not, however, permit our vaults, our records, or our institutional custodianship to be deployed as instruments of political architecture without the knowledge and explicit consent of the depositor." "You are the depositor, Mr. Potter, of 11 accounts that have been waiting for their primary holder for some considerable time." The silk in his voice had shifted quality, not warmer, nothing so imprecise as warm, but more precisely itself, the way a formal statement becomes more formal when the stakes underlying it are named. "Gringotts informs its clients, that is the full extent and the full substance of our position." Harry turned the folded compact over once more. He put it inside his robe. "I'd like to take the house documentation," he said. "It is yours," Ragnok said. "It has been yours since before it was filed." Harry crouched and collected 11 rolls of parchment from the stone floor, one by one, and tucked them under his left arm. He did it methodically in the order they had been laid out, because order was a form of attention, and these documents warranted attention. Hermione had already gathered her notes and was standing by the door, which was once again visible, which meant the chamber had decided the business was complete, with the expression of a woman who has 6 questions and has provisionally ordered them by priority and urgency. 28 days, Harry said to Ragnok. 27 and a half beginning now, Ragnok said. He opened the door. The corridor gave them back to the entrance hall in the same unhurried way it had taken them, the lanterns in sequence, the mineral air thinning by degrees back to the ordinary smell of the bank, marble and metal, and the faint residue of extinguished torches. They walked in silence until they reached the main hall's edge, where the noise of commerce resumed. Coins, voices, the distant clatter of a cart ascending from the deep vaults. "Peveril," Harry said. "I know," Hermione said. "The cloak, I know." He was not working through it. He had worked through it in the chamber, in the 4 seconds when the name was forming in the water and the world had gone slightly distant. He said it aloud because certain facts needed the resistance of air before they became real. The Deathly Hallows. The Peveril house seat is the oldest item on that list by 3 centuries. By at least 3 centuries, Hermione said. She was pulling at a loose thread on her bag strap, which was what she did when a thought was assembled, but she hadn't yet decided whether to release it. The Peveril brothers predate the Hogwarts Charter, which means the Peveril founding seat isn't derived from the same documents as the other 10. Predates the Charter's entire legislative framework. She stopped walking. "Harry, if the Charter was written around a pre-existing Peveril legal structure, and it would have to have been because you cannot build founding documents without accounting for the oldest prior claim, there may be provisions in the Peveril inheritance records that don't just equal the other 10 seats. That supersede the document the other 10 seats originate from." Harry held that for 2 steps. "Different rules," he said. "Different order of rules," Hermione said, "depending on what the Peveril records actually say." She resumed walking. "I need to read them tonight." He had been standing still for perhaps 30 seconds when he heard the voice, "Mr. Potter." The kind of voice that arrived already dressed, deep, unhurried, every syllable positioned with the care of a man who understood language as a form of property, a possession to be displayed, a signal of relative standing, a currency spent precisely. Harry turned. Aldrich Knott was 6 feet tall and silver-haired and wore robes of a quality that communicated not "this was selected today, but this is what I wear because this is what I am." He was attended by a personal secretary carrying a leather document case and a Gringotts teller who was escorting him toward the vault corridor with the body language of professional courtesy rather than necessity. He walked with the unhurried authority of a man arriving to an occasion he had arranged. His face, encountering Harry, arranged itself into the expression of pleasant surprise deployed by someone who had been expecting this exact meeting for at least a week. "Lord Knott," Harry said, because using the title first was both accurate and a way of indicating that surprise was not on offer from his side of the exchange. Knott's eyes dropped to the 11 rolls of parchment under Harry's arm. A single glance, trained, economical, the assessment of a man who processed information the way other people breathed. He clocked the number in a fraction of a second and released it. "A productive morning," he said. "Routine audit," Harry said. "The ministry has been working through the PS. Of course." Knott's hands were clasped before him, thumbs at rest. "I have vault business of my own today, a peculiar coincidence." The word coincidence arrived wearing the word illusion underneath it, in the way that the most precisely chosen words often contain their own dismantling. Inheritance reviews can be quite comprehensive in certain cases. I understand the process varies considerably depending on the complexity of the estate. "Mine wasn't too bad," Harry said. Knott's gaze returned to the parchment rolls. A second assessment, slightly longer than the first, the look of a man performing a calculation he has already performed once and is now verifying. He arrived at the same number, 11. The number registered behind his eyes and the face above it performed its function with the professionalism of a face that had been doing this for 70 years. 1 degree of adjustment in his cuffs. The movement of a man resettling himself, which was also the movement of a man recalibrating. "Well," his voice carried its plummy warmth without disruption. "I hope we'll have occasion to speak more formally in the near future, Mr. Potter. Now that your estate situation has been clarified, there are matters of considerable mutual interest that the Wisengamot might find it valuable to discuss." He smiled, which was the correct diplomatic expression and nothing else. "I look forward to it, as do I," Harry said, in the same way that a locked door looks forward to the next knock. Knott inclined his head, the geometry of a man performing deference that costs him nothing right now, measuring out exactly the degree required and not 1 degree more, and passed them, continuing toward the vault corridor with his secretary and his teller. Harry did not watch him go. He walked to the door and out into Diagon Alley where the September morning was cold and bright, and a cart vendor was selling roasted chestnuts from a copper pan at the alley's edge, and the smoke from it drifted across the entrance to Gringotts and smelled of nothing more significant than autumn. Hermione appeared at his shoulder. "He was already here when we arrived." Her voice was quiet, clipped. "His vault appointment was at 9:15. He would have known your audit started at 9. He positioned himself in the entrance hall to see you come out. I know, Harry said. He sent 3 letters to Gringotts about your inheritance before you knew you had one. I know, Harry shifted the 11 rolls under his arm. He's had longer to prepare for this than I have. So we work faster, Hermione said. She was already reaching into her bag. Grimmauld Place received them at 11:30. Kreacher had polished the kitchen table to a reflective perfection that meant he had been anxious since the Ministry Owl, which meant he had been reading the seals on Harry's post again, which was technically a violation of the standing agreement they had reached in July, and which Harry did not have the energy to address today. He set 11 rolls of parchment on the table and the folded founding compact beside them and pulled out a chair. Hermione had her books out before she had her coat off. She worked the way she always worked, systematically, at speed, with the occasional sound of a page being turned with more force than strictly necessary when she found something she'd been looking for. Harry worked through the house rolls from left to right, reading each document in full before moving to the next, keeping a separate parchment for notes. The language was formal and archaic in the upper registers, but the substance of each document was consistent. Seat identification, lineage verification, legislative rights enumerated, operational conditions specified. By the time he reached the 7th roll, a pattern had become clear enough to name. The proxy lords, he said. Hermione looked up. The 7 provisional appointments. They're listed in each document as temporary operational holders pending primary heir confirmation. He turned the document toward her. They've been voting in the Wisengamot under these seats for years, decades in some cases. Hermione looked at the dates in the roll. Something moved across her face, the specific expression of someone absorbing an injustice that is not surprising but is still, upon direct examination, infuriating. She put it away and picked up her quill. We need to know who they are and which way they've been voting. We need to know who appointed them, Harry said. Provisional appointments don't come from nowhere. Someone had the institutional authority to place those lords in those seats. They worked through to mid-afternoon. Kreacher brought food twice and tea 3 times and did not speak, which was his version of attentive service. The table disappeared under parchment in the organized chaos that Hermione's research always generated. Annotated precedents left, Wisengamot procedure right, Harry's cross-referenced notes filling the center in his own less methodical but functionally accurate hand. Harry unrolled the 11th parchment, the Emrise documentation, for the first time at 3:30, when the light through the kitchen window had gone from sharp afternoon to the preliminary gray of dusk. The script was unlike any of the others, not a different language, the same formal English of the other 10, but written in a notation system that was simultaneously legal text and something else, something layered underneath the legal structure like a second language written in the same alphabet. Certain words had an additional valence, a resonance that made them feel less like they were describing a legal status and more like they were performing one, as if the act of reading them correctly was itself a form of recognition. Hermione, Harry said. She was beside him in 2 steps, looking at the script over his shoulder. She was quiet for 10 seconds, which was a long time for Hermione facing a problem that had a solution. Early Founders-era legal notation, she said. I've seen references to it in magical bloodlines, but never a primary source. The notational system treats specific words as dual function, their legal terms and enchantments simultaneously. She took the roll from him, not gently but not carelessly either, with the focused hands of someone who is treating a document as evidence rather than history. I'll need an hour to translate the key provisions accurately. Take 2, Harry said. He picked up the folded founding compact. The copper wax seal was still warm. He turned the compact in his hands without opening it, not because he was reluctant to, but because he wanted to understand what he was about to read before the words themselves arrived. He had learned that from the Horcrux hunt. Knowing the shape of something before you encountered it directly was a form of preparation, and preparation was what stood between you and being controlled by the information rather than using it. He broke the seal. The compact unfolded in sections. The outer portions were the legal framework, founding house definitions, historical context, the conditions of the cooperation mechanism, and the cooperation mechanism's alternatives. This was dense and deliberate, and Harry read it carefully, making notes in the margin of his working parchment. The dissolution clause occupied the document's interior, sealed within the outer legal architecture like a room within a room. He read it 3 times, then he read it a 4th time, specifically for the conditions of invocation, because the conditions were both simple and absolute, and he wanted to be certain he had understood them correctly. 11 founding seats acting in unanimous concert through the authorization mechanism of the Peveril seat may invoke this clause. Upon invocation, the legislative body established under this charter is dissolved and reconstituted by general election within 60 days. No challenge may be raised against a properly authorized invocation. This clause is not subject to legislative amendment. He set the compact down. From the other end of the table, Hermione's quill scratched steadily through the Emrise notation. The kitchen had gone fully dark outside. The window above the sink held a rectangle of London night, orange-lit from below by street lamps. Creature had lit the kitchen lanterns at some point without Harry noticing. "Hermione," Harry said, "when you translate the Emrise provisions, look specifically for any language about the Peveril seat's function within the founding compact's operational structure." She did not look up. Already flagged it. 3 minutes. 3 minutes passed in the scratch of quill on parchment and the distant sound of London and the specific warmth of the kitchen that had been cold and unloved for most of its existence and was now incrementally becoming something else. "Done," Hermione said. She set down her quill. She picked it up again and wrote 2 more words, then set it down finally. She turned the parchment around and pushed it across the table. Harry read the translation. He read it a second time, more slowly. "The Peveril seat does not vote with the founding houses. It holds them." He set the parchment flat on the table with both hands. Outside, London continued its indifferent evening. The lanterns made no sound. The line of translated text sat in the kitchen light and was perfectly, irreversibly clear. "They don't want 11 votes," Harry said. "They want 1, Hermione said. Her voice had gone very quiet in the way it went when a thing was too large to be loud about. Harry looked at her. "If the Peveril seat holds the other 10 rather than voting with them," she said, and he could hear her constructing the argument in real time, laying each piece against the next with the precision of load-bearing architecture. "If it functions as the mechanism rather than a member, then controlling the Peveril seat doesn't give you a share of the founding vote." She leaned forward, one hand pressing flat against the table. "It gives you the architecture of the founding vote. The cooperation compact, the 9-seat supermajority, the whole legislative calculation Knott's been building toward, none of it is actually about 9 seats. You don't need 9 seats if you have the mechanism that all 11 operate through." Her eyes were very steady on him. "The Peveril seat doesn't give Knott 11 votes, it gives him the Wisengamot." The kitchen was very still. The lantern above the table held its flame without movement. The air too settled for even that small disturbance. Harry looked at the compact and the 11 house rolls and the translated Emrise provision and his own working notes and the tea that had gone cold an hour ago and had been pushed to the corner of the table where cold things went when there was no longer room to pay attention to them. "Right," he said. He picked up his quill. "We start with the moderate block," he said. "Anyone who has voted against Knott's faction more than twice in the last 3 years. Names, voting records, and anything they've publicly said about the Reconciliation Act." Hermione was already opening a recorded history of Wisengamot votes, 1975, present with the focused attention of someone who has been waiting to open it for several hours and is now doing so with justified purpose. "And the Peveril records," Harry said. "Everything in there about the authorization mechanism, how it works, what conditions govern it, whether there are limits on how many times it can be invoked. I'll cross-reference against the founding compact's dissolution clause language," she said without looking up. Pages turned. Her quill found its place. Harry picked up the 11th parchment, the Emrise documentation in its dual-function notation, and read it again from the beginning, this time for everything he had not yet understood rather than everything he had. The notation system was strange under his eyes. Each keyword seemed to carry a weight that was simultaneously legal and actual, as if the act of a Peveril heir reading these words was not just reading them but doing something with them, completing a circuit that had been open for 312 years. He was not certain how he felt about that. He was certain it was true. Outside the kitchen window, London was doing its ordinary London evening, indifferent and continuous and lit from below. The orange glow of the street lamps made the glass look like something old and warm and permanent. 26 days remaining. He turned to the next page of the Emrise documentation and read, Chapter 2, 11 votes. The Wisengamot convened emergency sessions on Thursdays because the chamber had been designed in an era when Thursdays were considered favorable for matters of justice, and nobody had revised this in 7 centuries. Harry arrived 14 days after Gringotts, wearing robes he had not owned 15 days ago. The tailor was Madame Quigley, who ran a shop off the upper end of Knockturn Alley in a building whose frontage was so unremarkable it was almost architectural commentary. Her family had dressed founding house lords for 200 years. Hermione had found her. Harry had submitted to 2 hours of measuring that felt less like tailoring and more like being carefully read, and emerged with 4 sets of robes in colors he would not have chosen himself: deep green, charcoal, midnight blue, and 1 set in a black so complete it seemed to negotiate with the light around its edges rather than simply absorbing it. The founders wore the colors of their bloodlines, Madame Quigley had said on her knees at his hem, her voice carrying the precision of old knowledge delivered to someone who needed it regardless of whether they had asked. Not their family colors, not their house colors, the colors that existed before there were houses to put colors on. The 11 house seals were embroidered at both cuffs in copper thread, present without announcing themselves, the way structural things are present. He was wearing the black robes now, and a cold Thursday morning was doing its cold Thursday work on Diagon Alley as he walked through it, and the Wisengamot building on its side street received him through a door that knew who he was before he touched it, because apparently that was a feature of doors connected to founding compact wards, which was information Hermione had delivered at 11:30 the previous night, along with 6 other pieces of information in the same sentence, none of which Harry had asked her to stop delivering. The chamber had a specific chair. He had been told about it in Ragnarok's letter, received 4 days after the audit, a formal institutional notification that ran to 3 pages, and whose relevant content could be summarized in 2 sentences. The founding seat ward had designated a chair at the head of the assembly arc for the use of all 11 founding seats in singular occupancy, and the chair would recognize him by blood connection and register his presence as the quorum of all 11 seats simultaneously. He had read those 2 sentences 11 times. He had not yet decided how to feel about them and had provisionally decided that was a question for after the session. The chamber filled around him while he sat. Members arrived in clusters, in pairs, alone, the social topography of a body whose internal alliances were legible and who walked in with whom, and who arrived deliberately separate. Harry watched it from the chair that held 11 seats, and noted the clusters with the same flat attention he would have given to the layout of a room he needed to move through quickly. 29 traditional block members filling the far arc, 16 in the moderate faction distributed across the middle, a scattering of independents occupying the architectural margins, with the studied distance of people who had learned the value of being difficult to categorize. 3 chairs in the moderate faction were empty, members who had chosen not to attend. That was already a communication. Lucius Malfoy arrived alone, which was its own communication. No Wisengamot colleagues flanking him, no performance of block solidarity. He took a seat in the outer arc of the traditional section with the contained grace of a man who had learned, over the past 2 years, to make no movement that could be used as evidence. His robes were pearl gray and immaculate. He looked at Harry from across the chamber with the expression of a man preparing to be gracious toward someone he would prefer to be contemptuous of, and deploying that graciousness with the complete sincerity of a person for whom the alternative was catastrophically worse. He inclined his head 6 degrees more than the occasion technically demanded. Harry looked away. Aldrich Knott entered 4 minutes after Harry and found the chair at the head of the assembly arc already occupied. He processed this in 3 steps. His pace did not change, his expression did not change, the quality of his composure did not change, but something behind all of that shifted with the smooth, practiced efficiency of a man who has spent 7 decades recalculating in real time and has gotten very good at doing it without exterior evidence. He took his seat in the senior traditional block with the composure of a man who has decided the development is merely interesting. His eyes found Harry's, held them for precisely 1 second, released. Chief Warlock Abernathy opened the session with the administrative competence of a man primarily notable for his administrative competence: 2 resolutions, a procedural update, a confirmation of quorum. Harry sat through 11 minutes of it, enough time to complete his survey of the room's topography and commit it to the part of his memory that functioned as tactical ground maps. Knott rose before Abernathy had finished introducing new business. He did not rise with urgency. He rose the way a man rises when he has been sitting specifically in order to rise at this moment, the motion of a prepared thing being deployed. Chief Warlock, his voice occupied the chamber's acoustics completely without effort, the natural possession of a voice that has been trained to consider the room its instrument. I move to introduce motion 47 on priority business. The motion concerns the custodianship of 11 founding house seats, newly occupied by a single heir whose. He turned toward Harry with the measured courtesy of a man about to perform a compliment that is also a diminishment, whose courage in the recent conflict is not in question by anyone in this chamber. What is in question and what the motion addresses is the matter of proper governance, an heir of Mr. Potter's background, Muggle-raised, without formal grounding in the founding house tradition or in the procedural history of the seats he now holds, requires, the motion argues, a period of appropriate institutional mentorship before exercising the full legislative authority attached to 11 founding votes. The Traditional Houses Committee, as the body with the most relevant, Lord Potter, said Ragnarok. The chamber turned. He was standing in the observer's gallery at the western wall, the institutional observer's position established under the 1717 treaty, which every member of the Wisengamot was technically required to acknowledge and which, in practice, nobody looked at unless they had a specific reason. He had entered without Harry noticing, which was either a goblin institutional skill or simply a consequence of the chamber's attention being elsewhere. He stood with his hands at his sides, copper cuffs precise, and his voice had arrived in the room with the authority of something that does not need volume to carry. The correct form of address, Ragnarok said, for an individual occupying a founding house seat of record is Lord. The relevant provision is subsection 9 of this body's own procedural charter, page 42, not turned toward the observer's gallery. The expression he assembled for this turn was a small masterwork of civil acknowledgement that contained, at its precise center, the controlled displeasure of a man who has been corrected in his own room by someone he does not consider a peer. He deployed it for 2 seconds, then released it. "Thank you," he said, with a courtesy so elaborate it functioned as its opposite, "for the clarification." He returned to the chamber. Lord Potter's background, while representing a genuine public asset, was formed in circumstances that are institutionally irregular. The custodianship motion provides the appropriate mentorship structure that any reasonable, "I'd like to respond," Harry said. Abernathy looked at him with the expression of a man whose procedural world has just become more complicated. "Lord Potter, the motion hasn't been formally introduced to the floor, I know, but Lord Knott has characterized the motion's nature and purpose, and I'd prefer to address the characterization before it becomes the frame everyone is working from." He did not raise his voice. The founding seat ward and the room's old acoustics carried it regardless. The custodianship motion, as structured, places the voting rights of 11 founding seats under the operational oversight of the Traditional Houses Committee for an indeterminate mentorship period. During that period, the committee advises and directs the casting of all 11 founding votes on any legislation it designates as founding compact relevant. He set one hand on the chair's arm. The copper seals at his cuffs caught the chamber light. "That isn't mentorship, that's proxy authority." The difference isn't a matter of interpretation. The moderate faction shifted. Not physically, politically, the way a body of people shifts when an argument has arrived that reorganizes the room's geometry. A characterization, Knott said, deploying patience like a structural material, that is imprecise and that does not reflect the motions. The motion was drafted using language from the 1643 Hayward custodianship case, Harry said, identical phrasing across 9 key provisions. That custodianship terminated with the heir retaining 4% of his own legislative authority. The proxy voting agreements embedded during the mentorship period had absorbed the rest. The documentation is on file at Gringotts. He looked at Knott with the attentiveness of someone who is not hostile but is paying very close attention. "I read it last week. Shall I read it into the record here, or would a summary serve?" One of the independent members, a woman in her middle years who had been taking notes since the session opened, whose name Harry had confirmed was Counselor Petrova from the Wisengamot background documentation Hermione had assembled, looked up at him. "Not approval. Assessment. The specific quality of attention someone gives when they are recalculating a person's value." Knott placed both hands flat on the bench before him. Fingertips down, deliberate, the composed posture of a man who has chosen to regroup. The 1643 case involved a minor heir without the institutional foundation necessary for. "I killed Voldemort," Harry said. The chamber held this for a moment. "I understand that's not a qualification for parliamentary procedure. I'm not citing it as one, I'm citing it because institutionally irregular is doing the work of 3 different arguments in Lord Knott's framing, and I want the record to be clear about what my background actually consists of, before we establish whether it requires institutional remediation." He turned to Abernathy. "Chief Warlock, I'd like to formally introduce evidence under Founding House Privilege, Article 7 of the Procedural Charter." Abernathy looked at his procedural charter, found Article 7, looked at it with the expression of a man who has just confirmed that the thing he hoped was not there is, in fact, there. "Evidence is in order," he said. Harry placed a rolled parchment on the copper ledge that ran the length of the founding seat. He unrolled it and held it at the height the chamber's sightlines demanded. The Hogwarts Charter, founding document, Article 14. "No motion, procedure, or compact enacted by the body established hereunder shall supersede, restrict, or administratively annul the voting rights of a verified heir of any founding seat, such rights being granted not by this body but by the lineage of blood which this body was created to represent." He set the parchment down. The custodianship motion is a motion that administratively restricts the voting rights of 11 founding seats. Under the document this body was founded on, there is no procedural gray area in that description. The moderate faction members were looking at each other in the specific way people look at each other when they are deciding whether they are permitted to find an argument convincing. Nott's face remained composed. "The Charter's interpretation has historically been subject to Ragnarok," Harry said. Ragnarok, at the observer's gallery, reached inside his robe and produced a parchment without visible hurry. He crossed the chamber floor to Abernathy's podium with the unhurried precision of an institution performing a function it has been waiting to perform for a very long time. He set the parchment before the chief warlock, returned to the gallery, and resumed his position. "Gringotts' formal attestation of the Hogwarts Charter's founding document," Ragnarok said from the gallery, in the carrying voice that needed no amplification. "Dated to the era of its original sealing under the Goblin institutional custodianship established at the same time. Lineage verification of all 11 founding seats and confirmed occupancy as of this morning." Abernathy looked at the attestation with the expression of a man who has been handed a problem he did not create and is not equipped to put down. 4 members of the traditional bloc had produced their session documentation and were, with varying degrees of subtlety, looking for page 42. Nott turned with the minimal movement of a man who does not waste movement, 6 positions to his left. Lucius Malfoy was examining his own hands where they rested on the bench before him, thumbs parallel, as if the answer to a question he had been sitting with for several days was located in the architecture of his own fingers. He turned his signet ring once 1 degree, the private movement of a decision being finalized, and stood. "Chief Warlock," his voice arrived in the chamber with the theatrical weight of a man who has rehearsed a speech and is now performing it for the first and last time, aware that the performance is also the event. "I speak on behalf of several members of the moderate traditional bloc." He placed his hands on the bench before him in a gesture that read as authority and was also, if you looked at the knuckles, a way of anchoring himself. "The custodianship motion has a structural difficulty that its architects may not have fully anticipated when they drafted it." He turned toward Nott with an expression of elaborate professional regret, the kind that is so precisely calibrated it functions as a declaration. "The Malfoy seat is categorized in this body's internal records under provisional founding house adjacency. The motion's language restricts the voting rights of all seats under founding classification. The Wisengamot's own categorization system places founding adjacent seats within founding classification for purposes of procedural motions affecting founding rights." He paused. "This is documented in the records, page 7, footnote 3, another pause. "The Malfoy family has held its seat independently for 9 generations. I will not vote to subordinate it to a committee. I move that motion 47 be referred back to its proposing block for substantive revision before any vote is held." He sat down. 2 members of the traditional bloc had, with varying degrees of haste, turned to page 7. Nott's face performed the expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered by someone he mentored in the art of outmaneuvering, and is not prepared to acknowledge either the fact or the mentor-student dynamic publicly. He performed it for approximately 3 seconds and released it cleanly. "The motion," he said with a precision that had shed most of its silk and was now primarily load-bearing, "does not apply to adjacent." Footnote 3, Lucius said pleasantly without looking up. The session recessed at 11:27. Harry walked out of the chamber into the antechamber, which was wood-paneled and furnished with benches and a tea urn that nobody was using. The antechamber had the quality of a room designed for conversations that needed to not be on the record. It had served that function for a long time and the walls had absorbed it. Hermione was there. She had been in the public gallery throughout the session, which was the furthest the building's ward permitted a non-member, and she had come down during the final minutes of the session with 3 books under one arm and her notes in the other hand, and the expression of someone who had been watching a performance she had partially scripted and was assessing the execution. The page 7 footnote, she said, arriving at Harry's shoulder, was in the background documentation I sent Malfoy's solicitor 3 days ago. I know, Harry said, you know, I asked Ragnarok to ensure it reached him through an appropriate channel. Ragnarok determined an appropriate channel. Hermione looked at him for a moment. You used Malfoy. Malfoy used himself, Harry said. I gave him accurate information about his own interests. What he did with it was his decision. She absorbed this with the particular expression of someone updating a model. That's actually quite, don't, Harry said. She pressed her lips together. The referral back to the proposing block, she said, shifting register, buys time but doesn't kill the motion. Not will revise it, remove the founding adjacent classification language, reintroduce it. 2 weeks, maybe 3, I know. So the next move is, Not will want a private meeting before the session reconvenes, Harry said. To offer the compact directly, Hermione opened her mouth. He'll frame it as the cooperation provision, Harry said, a narrower instrument. Retain my voting rights on everything except founding compact legislation, where the cooperation provision creates an alignment mechanism with the traditional house's committee. He looked at the T-urn. The Peveril authorization function transfers to the committee under the cooperation provision. He'll describe it as a formality. He had to have read the Peveril documentation, Hermione said. To know what the authorization function actually does, he can't have drafted the cooperation provision without knowing what he was drafting it to acquire. He's known for longer than we have, Harry said. Probably. A door at the antechamber's far end opened and Lucius Malfoy came through it alone, with the precise energy of a man who has timed his entrance and is not going to acknowledge having timed it. He crossed toward Harry in a straight line, which was itself a communication. No circling, no social approach geometry, straight line, which meant he had decided this conversation had no room for performance. Lord Potter, he said. He stopped 2 feet away, which was the distance of a frank conversation rather than a formal one. Malfoy, Harry said. A pause that held its shape. The cooperation provision, Lucius said, looking at a point just past Harry's shoulder with the concentration of a man thinking carefully about what he is and is not saying. You've read it. I have. Then you know that what I said in the chamber about the founding adjacent classification was accurate. I know the Malfoy seat would have been absorbed under the motion's original language, Harry said. I know the cooperation provision's final page contains a clause extending the alignment mechanism to founding adjacent seats upon the compact's activation. I know that clause was added in the 4th draft. He watched Lucius's face process the 4th draft detail, which Hermione had found at 1 in the morning on day 8. Not built you into the trap and then told you the trap was the alternative. Lucius's hands were clasped behind him now, a postural shift, the movement of a man who has arrived somewhere he did not fully expect to arrive. His face did the work of expressing nothing about this. He was very good at that. 2 years of post-war public life had made him better. He will approach you in the next. He glanced toward the main antechamber clock, 18 minutes. Before the session reconvenes, Committee Room 4, what will he offer beyond the compact, Harry said. Withdrawal of the custodianship motion. Lucius turned his signet ring on his finger 1 degree, the same physical habit Harry had noted in the chamber, permanently. He'll present it as a concession. It will be packaged as an act of good faith. The ring turned back. It costs him nothing. The custodianship motion was always a negotiating position, not an end. And the registry, Harry said. Lucius was still for a moment. The non-citizen registry, he said, and his voice had shifted. The plumminess was still structural, but something behind it had gone careful in a way that was different from performance. I was not aware of its inclusion in the act until last week. Harry looked at him. I am aware, Lucius said precisely, that this information arrives from a credibility deficit. I am telling you regardless. He met Harry's gaze with the directness of a man who has decided the cost of performing sincerity is lower than the cost of not performing it, and who is not entirely certain the distinction is a performance anymore. There are 412 names on it. I did not advocate for it. I am telling you because the information is relevant to your negotiation and because, he stopped. His jaw moved without producing words for a moment, which was unusual for Lucius Malfoy and was, precisely because of its unusualness, more convincing than anything polished would have been. My son went to school with Muggle-born children for 6 years. What the registry would do to their families, he stopped again. Roll added it, not allowed it. Those are facts. A silence that had weight and was not comfortable and was not meant to be. I know they're facts, Harry said. They're his facts to answer for until he answers for them. Lucius inclined his head, the formal degree, the appropriate measure, and walked back through the far door without further ceremony. Hermione had been standing 3 feet to Harry's left and had been so still during this exchange that she had become functionally part of the room. She exhaled now. "He's not reformed," she said, not loudly. "No," Harry said, "he's recalibrated." He picked up the founding compact from the bench beside him where he had set it when he sat down. The copper seal was warm in his palm. There's a difference. Recalibrated can be useful. Can it be trusted? Not categorically. He turned the compact over, but he told us about the registry clause. He didn't have to. Hermione looked at her notes, then at Harry, then at the antechamber clock. 15 minutes, she said. "I know." Harry handed her the founding compact. "Hold this. I need you to confirm one number before I go in." She took it. "What number?" "The 60-day re-election period under the dissolution clause. Is there any provision in the charter that extends or suspends that timeline under emergency circumstances? Any exception language Knott's legal team could use to slow the clock if the dissolution were invoked." Hermione opened her book before he'd finished the sentence. Pages moved. "No," she said 40 seconds later. "The 60-day period is unconditional. The charter's language is shall, not may, no qualifying provisions." She looked up. "It was deliberate. The founders didn't want a dissolution to be stallable. If you invoke it, the clock runs regardless of what anyone argues." "Good," Harry said. He took the compact back. "That's what I needed." Ragnarok was standing at the antechamber's south corridor entrance. Not waiting, standing, which was different. Waiting implied expectation of something that had not yet occurred. Ragnarok's posture was the posture of something that has already occurred and has simply not yet been communicated. He crossed to Harry and Hermione in 12 steps with the directness that was, Harry had come to understand, the goblin's standard social mode. No approach geometry, no greeting ceremony, direct to substance. "I know," Harry said. "Walk with me." He looked at Hermione. "Gallery," she said. She had already turned toward the stairs. "I'll be watching the door." Ragnarok fell into step at Harry's left. They walked the corridor toward Committee Room 4, a 20-second walk that felt longer because of the quality of the silence Ragnarok maintained, which was not the silence of someone with nothing to say, but the silence of someone choosing the right moment for what they have to say. 12 feet from the committee room door, Ragnarok said, "The 7 provisional lords received their formal notifications this morning." Harry stopped walking. The notifications confirming that their contested inheritance provisional status was resolved by the verification of a primary heir, Ragnarok continued, stopping half a step later with the physical precision of a man who had anticipated the stop. Under the terms of all 7 provisional appointments, their operational authority ceased at the moment notification was delivered and received. Harry looked at him. Notification was delivered by Gringotts' institutional messenger at 9:17 this morning, Ragnarok said, and received by all 7 recipients between 9:22 and 9:48. He clasped his hands. The 7 reverting seats are under direct primary heir operational authority. The Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Peveril seats have been under primary heir authority since the audit completion 14 days ago. All 11 founding seats, Harry said. As of 9:48 this morning, Ragnarok said. "Yes, Nott doesn't know yet," Harry said. Not a question, a timeline calculation. The session had opened at 9. Nott had introduced his motion at 9:14. The notifications had been received during the session. Nott had been in the chamber. He had not been told. The institutional notification of the Wisengamot will be submitted at the session's close, Ragnarok said, in accordance with standard procedure. It will not be submitted during recess. He paused. This is consistent with standard procedure. Which meant Ragnarok had made a completely procedurally orthodox decision that also happened to give Harry the entirety of his negotiating position before Nott knew he had it. Harry looked at the goblin for a moment with the specific attention of someone who is deciding whether to acknowledge a thing that both parties understand and that benefits from being technically unacknowledged. "Thank you," Harry said, "for the information. Gringotts informs its clients," Ragnarok said, with the precise formality of a sentence that means considerably more than its words. Harry went into Committee Room 4. Nott was at the table when Harry entered, seated at the near side with his hands folded and a parchment open before him and the studied composure of a man who had been composing himself since he requested this meeting and had achieved a thoroughness that was itself a form of communication. 2 lanterns, copper table. The smell of old wood and the particular stillness of a room built for private conclusions. no secretary. Not had come to this alone. Harry sat. Not looked at him for a moment with the focused attention of a complete assessment. Not hostile, not warm, the look of a man confronting something he has prepared for and is discovering is not exactly what he prepared for. "I'll be direct," he said. "Please," Harry said. "Motion 47 will be withdrawn before this session reconvenes." He delivered this as whether factual, no implied concession, no performance of sacrifice. The motion served its purpose. The custodianship mechanism is not the instrument that best serves the situation. He pushed the copper-sealed parchment across the table toward Harry. The cooperation provision is narrower. It does not restrict your voting rights across general legislation. It creates an alignment mechanism between your founding seats and the traditional house's committee specifically on founding compact legislation, a category that represents perhaps 12% of the Gringotts' annual business. He placed 2 fingers on the edge of the parchment. You retain complete independent legislative authority across the remaining 88%. The provision asks only that on founding compact matters, your 11 seats coordinate with the committee. And the Peveril authorization function, Harry said, a pause, moves to shared operational custody under the cooperation framework, not said, a formality. You remain the seat's primary holder. The shared custody simply ensures that the authorization mechanism doesn't operate without the committee's concurrence, Harry said. Nott's fingers were still on the parchment's edge. A coordination structure, he said, not a veto. The cooperation provisions, page 9, clause 4, Harry said. The authorization mechanism is, and I have the language here. He produced a folded paper from inside his robe, Hermione's notes in her rapid, clear hand, jointly held in operational trust by the compact signatory and the traditional house's committee as co-trustees, with any exercise of the mechanism requiring co-trustee concurrence. He set the paper on the table. Co-trustee concurrence is a veto. The language is lawyered to not look like one, but the mechanism is identical. He looked at Nott. You've built the cooperation provision around the Peveril seat's structural function, not around the 11 votes. You need the authorization mechanism because without it, the 11 votes are 11 separate votes and 11 separate votes can disagree, and you need them to operate as a single instrument. He paused. With co-trustee concurrence over the authorization mechanism, you have the Peveril seat. With the Peveril seat, you have all 11, configured however you need them. You have the Wisengamot. The lanterns held their positions. The copper table surface was still. Nott looked at Harry with the expression of a man who has been thoroughly read and is deciding whether to argue the reading or accept it and move to the next position. The decision took 3 seconds. He moved to the next position. You are, as I understand it, primarily concerned with the Purity Codification Act, he said. Specifically its citizenship definition and educational restriction provisions. And the registry, Harry said. The registry is a separate. It's in the Act's 3rd appendix, Harry said. It's not separate. The registry, Nott said with the controlled patience of a man correcting a minor procedural misclassification, was appended by Counselor Roll without my direct, Aldrich. Nott stopped. Harry had used his name the previous time as a mode of directness, of equal address. He used it again now for the same reason and for a second reason, because the use of a first name in this room in this conversation was a way of saying we are past the point where the formal register is doing useful work. Nott registered this. His composure remained intact, but its quality shifted, the silk thinning towards something more structural underneath. The registry has 412 names, Harry said. Some of them are children enrolled at Hogwarts right now. The educational restriction clause in the Act would bar them from sitting there OWLS. He set both hands flat on the table, not as a gesture of aggression, but as a way of being present in the room, of taking up the space the conversation required. I'm not going to sign a document that moves any mechanism toward that outcome, not the compact, not the cooperation provision, not a related instrument. That's not a negotiating position, that's the boundary. Nott looked at him. The room had the quality it had when 2 people in it have stopped performing and are encountering each other directly, which is a different quality from confrontation, not warmer but more real. The lanterns made no sound. Somewhere outside the committee room, the antechamber was filling again as the session prepared to reconvene. The Act, Nott said slowly, has provisions for exceptional. No, Harry said. A revision framework could be. No, Harry said with the same even weight, not louder, the same. The answer to every version of that offer is no. I'd like to move to what comes after no. Nott's hands, folded before him, were very still. You hold 11 founding seats, he said. The traditional block holds 17 working seats, the support of 9 independents. On a standard majority vote, the Purity Codification Act does not require your founding votes to pass. I know, Harry said. Then you understand that your refusal does not change the legislative arithmetic. On a standard majority vote, Harry said, you're right. He reached inside his robe and placed 3 documents on the table. The first, Hermione's translated Peveril provision. The Peveril seat does not vote with the founding houses. It holds them. The second, the dissolution clause from the founding compact, copied in his own hand onto fresh parchment. The third, a document in his handwriting on Peveril seal parchment, the copper seal at its base pressed with the warmth that the seal carried whenever he used it, which he had noticed on day 3 and stopped finding strange by day 9. A founding compact dissolution declaration, Harry said, signed under the Peveril seal, citing this body's violation of Charter Article 14 through the introduction of Motion 47 and through the historical operation of provisional founding seat appointments without primary heir notification or consent. He placed 1 finger on it. If I lodge this at Gringotts today, the standard majority vote you're describing doesn't exist in 48 hours, full re-election in 60 days, all current seats vacated, all provisional appointments permanently dissolved, not reassigned, dissolved. The Traditional Houses Committee loses its seat appointment authority under the reconstitution terms. The Purity Codification Act dies in committee at dissolution and cannot be reintroduced until a newly elected body has seated and completed its first procedural term. He watched not read the declaration, watched him read the dissolution clause, watched the calculation proceed behind a face that was performing stillness with the effort of a man who is genuinely still except for his mind. You would dissolve a 700-year institution, Nott said, and his voice had shed the plumminess almost entirely. What was under it was not different in kind. It was the same man, the same precision, but the register had dropped to something foundational, something that was not performing for the room because the room had contracted to 2 people and a decision. Reset, Harry said, not dissolve. The Charter's founders anticipated it. They built the mechanism. They put the Peveril authorization function in the dissolution clause specifically so that this action would require an heir who held Merlin's seat. They didn't want it available to anyone who happened to collect enough founding votes. They wanted it to require someone the lineage had chosen. He pulled the declaration back without putting it away. I haven't lodged it. That's the conversation we're currently having. Nott was quiet. The antechamber sounds filtered under the door, movement, voices, the rustling of robes, the particular acoustic of people returning to positions they had temporarily vacated. What? Nott said very carefully, with the precision of a man selecting the exact weight of a question. Do you want? Harry had the list. He had written it on day 12, revised it on day 13, given it to Hermione for stress testing on day 14. She had found 2 provisions that needed tightening and 1 that needed replacing entirely, and he had rewritten it on day 14's last hour. Motion 47 withdrawn permanently, he said. Not suspended, not referred, rescinded, and formally removed from future legislative agenda under the founding seat evidence introduced today. The Purity Codification Act in its current form withdrawn for complete revision, and any reintroduced version stripped of citizenship definition language and educational restriction provisions. Gringotts recognized as formal institutional custodian of the founding compact's terms, with independent audit authority over any future legislation touching founding seat rights or founding compact classification. He paused, and the Muggle-born non-citizen registry disbanded, retroactively. Every name on it expunged from Wisengamot records and from Gringotts institutional records simultaneously, as if it did not exist. Nott said nothing. 412 names, Harry said. Some of them are 11 years old. A silence that went on long enough to be a kind of answer. What you're describing, Nott said at last, requires me to withdraw legislation I have spent 17 years constructing. The version of it that harms people, Harry said. Yes. The principles underlying the act, Harry said, are your business and the business of the people who elect you. The registry clause, the citizenship definition language, the educational restrictions, those are not principles. Those are mechanisms. I'm asking for the mechanisms. Another silence, shorter. Nott was reaching the end of his available contingencies, and the process of reaching the end of contingencies had a particular quality in a man of his precision, not desperation, not visible distress, but a settling, the way a structure settles when it has identified its actual load-bearing elements and released what is decorative. The registry, he said, Rolls provision. I want it understood that it was Rolls provision, Harry said. I understand that. It's in the act you advanced. That's the record. He held Nott's gaze. The record changes when the expungement goes through. That's available to you. Not looked at his own folded hands. He looked at them for long enough that the lanterns flickered once the building's ventilation, not drama, and then returned to their steady amber. I'll need to consult with the block before the session reconvenes in 6 minutes, Harry said. He stood. He picked up the dissolution declaration and held it, not threateningly, just held it, present in his hand, the copper seal warm against his palm in the way it had been warm since day 3. I'll be in my seat. He walked to the door. Lord Potter. He stopped with his hand on the door, turned. Not was looking at him directly, not the diplomatic focus, not the assessment look, but the direct gaze of a man who has arrived at something he did not expect to arrive at and is not certain what to do with the arrival. The children on the registry, he said. The plumminess was almost entirely absent now. What was underneath it was not warm, but it was not cold either. It was the voice of a man speaking without the architecture of his persona, which was its own kind of revelation. I have a grandson, he is 9 years old. He stopped. The sentence did not continue in the direction it had appeared to be heading. Rolls provision, it was not. He stopped again. His hands were flat on the table. That provision would not have survived the Act's final reading. I would have removed it before the votes. Harry looked at him. I believe you believe that, Harry said. He went back to his seat. The session reconvened at 11:51. Not rose in the first minute with the same unhurried authority of his earlier rise, and the chamber's attention gathered around him with the trained reflex of a body accustomed to his precedence. Chief Warlock, he said, I move to withdraw motion 47 from the session agenda, effective immediately, and to remove it from the forward legislative schedule pending a comprehensive review of the founding seat governance framework. He sat down. 3 words of procedural notation, no elaboration, no performance of the machinery behind the decision. Abernathy confirmed the withdrawal with the relief of a man who has been watching a load-bearing wall and found it intact. Motion 47 is withdrawn. The custodianship proposal is removed from the current agenda. He made a notation. The session will proceed to standard business. Councillor Petrova, the note-taking independent, looked up from her parchment and looked at Harry with the expression she had been developing since his charter evidence. The expression of someone who has added a significant piece of information to a model she has been building for a long time. Harry looked at the session agenda in front of him. 3 standard resolutions, a property dispute, an infrastructure update from the post-war reconstruction committee. Entirely ordinary business. He worked through it with the attention he gave to everything in this room, now complete, tactical, nothing dismissed as irrelevant before it had been assessed. Lucius Malfoy, 6 seats and an arc away, voted the same way Harry voted on all 3 standard resolutions. He did not look at Harry when he did it. He did not need to. The session adjourned at 1:30. Ragnarok was waiting at the chamber's exit, which was, Harry had noted, a different configuration from waiting at the observer's gallery, where Ragnarok's role was institutional and formal. Standing at the exit was a personal decision. They walked out of the building together into the cold Thursday afternoon and down the side street toward the main thoroughfare. Harry had 11 rolls of parchment in his bag. He had brought them, all of them, because the kind of day this was going to be was the kind of day that required having everything you might need. The bag was heavy in a way that was satisfying rather than burdensome. The notification will be submitted to the Wisengamot this afternoon, Ragnarok said, of the Provisional Lord's reversal as they walked. Formal institutional record. Not will know within the hour, Harry said. Yes. A pause that was comfortable in the way that silences between people who are thinking about the same thing are comfortable. He will have known during your meeting that he was operating without full information. He is too experienced not to have sensed the asymmetry. It didn't change the negotiation, Harry said. No, Ragnarok said, because the negotiation was not about the 11 seats, it was about the registry. Harry looked at him. Ragnarok's expression was, for a moment, something that was not quite an administrator's expression. Not personal, not warm, but direct in a way that indicated a professional opinion being given outside the formal frame. 412, he said. Gringotts holds accounts for 63 of those individuals or their families. We have known the registry existed for 11 months. We could not act. He paused. Now we can. The cold afternoon carried the smell of coal smoke and the distant sound of traffic and the particular quality of London after rain, the city releasing what it had been holding, surfaces still wet, air carrying the memory of water. The withdrawal of the Act's current form is a commitment in principle, Harry said. The revision process could introduce different mechanisms that accomplish the same ends. It could, Ragnarok said. The audit authority established under your terms will identify such mechanisms before they reach a vote. And if Nott's successor is less willing to negotiate than Nott is, then the dissolution declaration is still in your robe, Ragnok said, and the Peveril seal is still warm. Harry looked at the street ahead. The main Diagon Alley junction was visible now, the top of the Gringotts building rising above the shopfronts in its white marble permanence. I'm going to need to do this for a long time, Harry said. Not a complaint, an acknowledgement of a dimension of the situation he had not fully inhabited until now. The next session, the revision framework, the audit authority's establishment, the registry expungement's execution, the 37 other things on the political horizon that would follow the 37 things on the current one. Yes, Ragnok said, you are. They went into Gringotts. The conference room had a copper-top table and 2 chairs and a feeling of things having been decided in it before, by people whose decisions had mattered. Ragnok set 2 documents on the table, the agreement terms, precisely transcribed, and beside them a new parchment, fresh vellum, the Gringotts institutional seal at its head. The compact between the 11 founding houses and the Goblin Nation, Ragnok said, in the carrying register of formal business. Formal advisory status for the Goblin Nation on all founding compact interpretation questions. Shared institutional authority over founding compact governance. The Goblin Nation's right to refuse execution of any transaction, appointment, or legislative action determined to violate founding compact terms. He set a quill beside it, plain black feather, standard ink, nothing ceremonial. Reciprocal, the 11 founding houses formally recognized the Treaty of Vault Integrity's protections as extending to Goblin institutional participation in founding compact oversight. The first such recognition by a sitting heir in the treaty's history. Harry read it. He read it with the same careful attention he had given every document in the past 14 days, not the speed of familiarity but the speed of genuine comprehension, working through each clause for what it said and what it didn't say and what the gap between those 2 things might contain. It was clean. Reciprocal in its actual structure, not its performed one. No ambiguous provisions, no embedded appendices, no clauses with the soft language that means something harder. The 1717 treaty, Harry said, it kept Gringotts neutral during both wars. It did, Ragnok said. People died because Gringotts was neutral. He said it without accusation, as information, as the thing that needed to be named before the document was signed. Ragnok was still for a moment. Yes, he said, they did. Harry picked up the quill, he signed. The date, the Peveril seal pressed at the bottom, the copper warmth of it against the new parchment, and then he set the quill down and pushed the document across the table. Ragnok signed. His signature was precise and formal and took exactly the time it needed. He set the quill down and the copper seal on the document's header pulsed once, not warm, not light, not dramatic in any way that required acknowledgement. Simply a fact becoming a permanent fact, the kind of warmth that is structural rather than theatrical. He picked up both signed copies and filed them in the copper cabinet with the movements of a man performing a function he considers important enough to perform exactly right. Harry sat back in the chair. Ragnok, he said, what's my full formal title? All 11, proper ceremonial order. A pause. Ragnok turned from the cabinet, and for a moment his expression was entirely its own thing, not the administrator's expression, not the formal observer's expression, but the expression of something very old that has been waiting for a specific question and has the answer exactly prepared. He began. Full title arrived in the conference room in Ragnok's resonant, rhythmic voice, each house name given its proper weight, the founders' names in the old inflection that the founding compact notation had given them, the Peveril designation last and longest, Lord of the Emrys seat, inheritor of the Peveril seal, authorized holder of the founding compact's dissolution instrument, primary heir of the 11 founding houses of the wizarding nation of Britain. And the room after it was a different shape from the room before it, not larger, different. Harry let it settle. Harry, he said. Ragnok looked at him. When it's just us, Harry said, just use Harry. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture and specific gravity. Ragnok looked at him with the sustained attention of a person for whom this kind of informality is not an insult, but an entirely unexpected gift that requires a moment's recalibration before it can be accepted. The quarterly review meeting, Ragnok said, for advisory compact coordination. The first is scheduled for Thursday's work, Harry said. Thursdays are already administrative. 6 weeks, Ragnok said. We will send a confirmation. Good, Harry stood. He picked up his bag with its 11 rolls of parchment. He was at the door when Ragnok spoke. Harry, he turned. Ragnok's hands were clasped before him, the copper cuffs precise. His expression was the administrator's expression again, formal, professional, and within that formality, briefly, something that was not formal at all. The registry names, he said. Gringotts will begin coordinating the expungement process this week. The ministry cooperation requires a formal request from a founding seat holder. He reached into his robe and produced a document, single page, already drafted, requiring a signature at the bottom. "If you would." Harry took it, read it, signed it. "The children," he said, returning it, "will have clean records by the end of the month," Ragnarok said. "All 412, the youngest is 7. Harry set the signed document on the table. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would be more accurate than the fact itself. He put his hand briefly on the document, 1 second too, and then picked up his bag and went to the door and out of it. The entrance hall was doing its afternoon business, the post-lunch crowd moving through in the particular purposeful rush of people who have taken exactly as long for lunch as they permitted themselves. The ceiling lanterns had warmed toward the amber of late afternoon. At the nearest teller's counter, coins were being counted, gold on copper, 1 piece at a time, the sound of it clean and percussive and entirely ordinary, the sound of the building's basic function continuing unchanged regardless of what had happened in the rooms behind its walls. Hermione was on the steps. She had her notebook open on her knee and was writing in the September afternoon light with the focus of a person who is not going to waste the 14 minutes since she arrived and has not wasted them. She looked up when the door opened. "Well," she said. Harry sat down on the step beside her. The stone was cold through the black robes. Diagon Alley was doing its ordinary afternoon, the chestnut cart at the alley's edge, the smoke from it crossing the entrance to the bank in a slow diagonal, the smell of coal and autumn and cooking. "The withdrawal motions will be in writing by Friday," he said. "The registry expungement starts this week, Gringotts coordinating. The Act's current form is withdrawn for revision. The audit authority will run oversight on whatever comes next." He watched the chestnut cart smoke drift. "Knots not finished." "None of them are. The next session will have new pressure and the one after that will have different pressure. And at some point someone in that chamber will find a mechanism we haven't read yet." "Then we'll read it," Hermione said. He looked at her. She had closed her notebook. She was looking at him with the expression she had been deploying since they were 11, which was the expression of someone who has made a decision about a person and is not reconsidering it. "I've already started the revision framework analysis," she said. "I found 3 provisions in the Act's second draft that Knott's team will probably try to reintroduce in modified form. And there's a precedent from 1891 that the audit authority needs to account for because it creates an exception window that—" "Hermione," Harry said. "What? Thank you." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the alley. "I went to school with Muggle-borns," she said, not loudly. "I am one. The registry—" She stopped. She picked up her pen and put it in her bag and did not continue the sentence. She did not need to continue the sentence. He sat on the steps of Gringotts in the September afternoon. 2 people on cold stone with the chestnut smoke crossing above them and the ordinary sound of the city continuing around them. And the dissolution declaration inside Harry's robe was still warm from the Peveril seal, and the new advisory compact was filed in a copper cabinet at Ragnarok's back, and 412 names were going to be erased from a record that should never have had them. And the Wisengamot's next session was 31 days away. Harry stretched his legs out on the steps. The copper seals at his cuffs caught the afternoon light, 11 of them, each smaller than a coin, each older than anything else he owned. The chestnut vendor's cart clinked as coins changed hands across the alley. He listened to it. Then he reached into his bag and took out the first of the 11 house rolls and opened it on his knee in the September light, because 31 days was enough time to know everything he currently didn't, and he intended to use it.